What's up, everybody? It's Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, and on this channel, we break down the trials and cases you care most about so you can understand how the American civil and criminal justice system works. And we try to make sure you understand what your rights are in every situation, which is why we try to walk you through the entire legal process while also answering your insightful questions along the way. And while it's not legal advice, it's always exciting. So buckle up for another episode of The Lawyer You Know. What's up, everybody? We're back at it today with a new case we haven't talked about, this FTX bankman-fried fraud case, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, all sorts of stuff that is a bit above my head. But we have a lot to talk about with this case. It's pretty convoluted. There are a lot of high-level legal issues going on that make it kind of different than some cases, but also very similar to others. And when I look at just the things we want to touch on in today's video, I've got a list here. The indictment, the criminal indictment, what's he charged with? What's he looking at? How are they going to prove it? Some background on the case, the civil complaints, questions you guys have, assets and whether he's bankrupt, does he have any money, extraditions, arrests, celebrities, promoters, all sorts of issues we want to talk through just on this video. So it's a ton, and it could be a 5-hour video, but we've got about an hour. We're going to get as much done in 45 minutes to an hour here as we can. We are going to go through the actual indictment together. We are, of course, going to give some background and, of course, answer many of your questions. But to help me is someone who has looked into this case a lot more than I have, and because of his specialized knowledge in this area of federal criminal cases on both sides, a former federal prosecutor and currently federal criminal defense attorney, my dad is going to come in here, go through this indictment with us. And the first thing I want to ask him when he gets on the screen is, what do federal prosecutors think about and what are they doing when they write these indictments? And talk about the fact that he's written numerous indictments throughout his career. He was the chief of the criminal division in the Middle District of Florida here in Tampa. So he was overseeing and reviewing the prosecutors below him that would write up these indictments. And he is now here backstage, coming on now to answer our questions. I actually need to fix this so that I put my headphones on here so it all works out audio-wise. Hello, Father.
Hello.
All right. So if you guys haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button for getting Big George on to talk about a federal criminal case. And my goal would be, if you guys are interested in it, my goal would be to bring my dad on periodically to discuss this case because I think it's going to be a big one. It's a federal prosecution. It's billions of dollars. It involves political figures. It involves celebrities. It involves cryptocurrency. So I think it's going to be an interesting case that's going to last for a while. So let me know by liking the video and in the comments if you do want us to continue following this. Thank you, Andrea Taylor, for the super chat. As always, a great way to start our show. But Dad, when you were a prosecutor, as the chief of assistant of the criminal division, did you write a lot of these indictments or did you review them mostly, or how did it work?
I wrote a lot of them, but I also had to review all of them that were done in the office. They all came across my desk. There's a lot of considerations that go into drafting indictments. And if you want to talk about this particular case, they had some unusual considerations that you normally don't have because of the extradition aspect of the indictment.
Okay, so what do you mean? What is that? Is that all you mean, just because the extradition, or was there more?
No, well, the extradition means they had to draft an indictment so that indictment would comport with Bahamian law, because the treaty with the Bahamas requires that the crime we charge him with in the U.S. is also a crime in the Bahamas. Mm. So you had to draft an indictment to comport with the elements of the Bahamian crimes so that the Bahamas would extradite him here.
Okay. So when you do draft an indictment, what other things are you thinking about? How do you choose the crimes you're going to charge? How many? Because a lot of these are so similar, right? The different kind of fraud cases that you pick from. How do you choose? And what were some of the interesting things they had to think about that they couldn't necessarily charge in this case because we're dealing with cryptocurrency?
Well, it really is. I know people talk about cryptocurrency, and I'm one of them, that a lot of people don't know the details of really how it functions. But a crime's a crime. A fraud's a fraud. You lie to people, you get them to invest in your company, that's a fraud. You take their money and you use it for things that you tell them you're not going to use it for, that's a fraud. So theft is theft. In this case, we just happen to be using a commodity that is not commonly known to a lot of people, but it's still a theft. So the crime has the same elements as any other crime, but you're just dealing with a more sophisticated commodity.
So give us a little background on the case factually before we get to the actual indictment and what bankman-fried is charged with. But what's going on in this case? What happened? A lot of people have read the articles or seen him go on news stations and give interviews or tweet about this case and give so much more information than any defense attorney would ever want him to give to the public.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about what the factual background is of this case.
Well, the factual background is that he graduated from MIT with physics and mathematics, and he started to work for various firms, Wall Street firms, that did investing or did a lot of these things, including crypto. Eventually, he decided to form his own company, and that first company was Alameda, and Alameda is really important in this. So he forms Alameda. After Alameda is kind of like a hedge fund where they gather money and they invest it in other companies. After he forms Alameda, he decides to form FTX, which is the crypto company. And FTX, basically, you put your money, crypto, as we all know, is not physical. You can't really touch it. Crypto is a digital currency. And so you have kind of like digital banks that hold the currency. Go ahead.
Real quick, sorry. And you're going to be talking most of this video, so I'll interrupt when I have questions and some things to point out. We did a case on the channel, Craig Wright, and he was being sued by a former maybe business partner about who started cryptocurrency and all this stuff. So everybody in the chat already knows I have no clue really about cryptocurrency. It's all kind of over my head. I have never invested in it because I don't like investing in things I don't understand. But a good question here from Rosie. Has anyone in the chat invested in FTX or cryptocurrency? There's a lot of people that are going to be in the chat that know a lot more about cryptocurrency than us. And we'll get to whether or not that's important in prosecuting someone for a crime like this. But for now, keep giving us the factual background because I'll ask you that question later.
So FTX is a holding or investment vehicle for people with cryptocurrency. It will hold their currency. So he has people invest in FTX as investors to own stock. He also has customers of FTX, like a bank, to put their cryptocurrency in. So there's two classes of people in there. So he takes this money, and Alameda, he tells everybody, is just another customer. There's somebody that is going to put their money in FTX. What really happened was FTX became the piggy bank for Alameda. So you're a customer and you put your money in FTX. You're an investor, you put your money in FTX. But FTX would then go on and make these investments. And when they needed money, they just reached their hand. Alameda would make investments. When they needed money, they would just reach their hand into FTX, take the money out, put it into Alameda, and then go out and invest it. So you were putting money in FTX, but what you really were doing, and you didn't know it, was you were really supplying the money for Alameda's investments. And that's not something you knew that you were doing. And so you shouldn't have been defrauded in that way, and your money shouldn't have been used that way. So what happened was this was going on, and what FTX was saying that they're so good about is they had what's known as a stopgap, a margin. In other words, you couldn't have a negative balance in FTX. So if you put money in there and your investment went down in value to a certain point, FTX would stop trading it and would stop that money from going any worse, and you wouldn't lose any more money, and the company wouldn't lose any more money.
And it would stop you. That's not individual to just cryptocurrency or FTX. I mean, there's normal, what do they call them? I guess traditional
margin
investments.
They're margin calls is what they call it, right?
Traditional investments have the same thing in them. So that's not some scam all on its own.
Right.
That was just one of the things. And you said one of the things that made FTX so great, or Bankman-Fried so great, is like he's got these computer programs that are supposed to be better than anybody else. He's supposed to be a
Right.
whiz kid, because we see it over and over again. Pete covered the Theranos case. These young, smart, captivating whiz kids come up, and they're worth billions and billions of dollars by creating these things that end up being frauds at the end of the day.
Right. So that's legitimate, and everybody liked that. It made it a safe investment for FTX because they had these stopgaps in there. Well, the one customer that didn't have a stopgap was Alameda. So Alameda could have a negative balance. So here we had in Alameda, which would have billions of dollars in negative balance in FTX. And whenever a bank would call an Alameda loan, Alameda would then reach into FTX, take money out, and pay the loan off. So that was going on back and forth, and it was going on, and nobody really knew about it. I mean, you had loans. You know, some of the investment, they list them in the SEC complaint, which I read, list individuals in there that would actually take a promissory note for $500 million from FTX. These are principals. And they would say, well, we need $500 million. So they just give them a promissory note, and they'd get $500 million. That was all working until cryptocurrency crashed. When cryptocurrency crashed, then all the banks that Alameda owed money to, they demanded payment on the loans. Alameda went into FTX to get the payment on the loans. But also what was happening simultaneously is FTX was trying to sell itself to another company. They were trying to make a big hit. This other company came in to do their due diligence, which is audit all the books and records of FTX. When they did that, it took them one day. And they said, whoa, we're not buying this company. It's a mess. Your books are a mess. Well, that went public. When that went public, all the FTX people said, hey, we want our money back. When they said we want our money back, then the whole thing fell apart because FTX didn't have the money.
That's how a Ponzi scheme falls apart. Yeah, that's
right.
exactly how.
So he has a record, by the way, so you'll know. He was worth over $20 million in October.
Billion.
Excuse me, 20 billion with a B. $20 billion in October. $10 million in the beginning of November.
These are billion.
I keep saying that. I know, big numbers for me. 10 billion numbers in the beginning of November. In the middle of November, it went down to $900 million, a 94% drop, which Bloomberg keeps records of billionaires. That was the largest single one-day drop in history. And now he's worth zero because they filed for bankruptcy. I think it was November 11th.
Okay, so let me get to a couple questions here real quick. Kuvira, you all don't laugh, but what is crypto? It's Bitcoin. It's the the currency that you can have online, basically in the stratosphere or whatever. We're not experts on it, but it's this Bitcoin. It's not paper money. It's not based on gold.
It's digital.
It's digital.
It's right. Digital as well. It is, right.
Barbara Godding, Papa Tragos, how did cryptocurrency crash? What does that mean? The value of it went down.
It's like anything else. It's a market. One day, soybeans you buy for $10. Another day, soybeans you buy for $20. Oil is one we hear about a lot. A barrel of oil is a price one day. The next day, the barrel of oil is just what the market will bear. And crypto just went up and down, just like the market. And it went way down. And when it way down, these banks weren't secured anymore. So they used the cryptocurrency to secure the loans.
Lala is a new member. Welcome, Lala. Cindy Lou, celebrities are getting busted for this. Yes, just wait. We're going to talk about that more. But for now, is that pretty much all the background you want to give? You ready to get to the indictment?
I think that gives the general idea of what happened.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's get to the indictment here. All right. Here's the unsealed indictment. So that's another question I had. Why seal indictments?
Well, because they want to keep them secret until the guy is arrested or in custody. And that's what they did in this case. They kept it secret until he was in custody in the Bahamas, and then they unsealed it. Because they don't want to give him a chance to run, because frankly, it's easy for the government to arrest somebody in the Bahamas. There's some other countries where it's not so easy.
Hold on one second. All right. Count one, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on customers. And this is important because if you look back at some of his tweets, he differentiates investors with customers, right? Grand
Right.
jury charges from at least in or about 2019 up to and including in or about November 2022. So 3 years-ish, this was happening in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere. The defendant and others known and unknown, willfully and knowingly did combine, conspire, confederate, and agree together and with each other to commit wire fraud. It was a part and object of the conspiracy that Samuel Bankman-Fried, aka SBF, the defendant, and others known and unknown knowingly devised, intended a scheme to defraud and for obtaining money and property by means of false and fraudulent pretenses, representations, and promises, would and did transmit and cause to be transmitted by means of wire, radio, and television communication in interstate and foreign commerce, writing, signs, signals, pictures, and sounds for the purpose of executing such scheme and artifice in violation of that statute. So a couple questions. Actually, let's finish here. Bankman-Fried agreed with others to defraud customers of FTX.com by misappropriating those customers' deposits and using those deposits to pay expenses and debts of Alameda Research, Bankman-Fried's proprietary crypto hedge fund, and to make investments. So after that background, we understand who some of these players are, where we're getting, where we're going. Now, what's very interesting, two things I want to ask you about. The first, why the Southern District of New York?
Well, it's very common. The SEC is headquartered in New York. The stock exchange, commodities exchange, all of these things are headquartered in New York. So it's very common for these type of sophisticated paper, and we're talking about large paper crimes, to come out of the Southern District of New York. It's just, they could have done it probably anywhere that there was an investor, but they selected New York because they're very commonly litigated there. Judges are experienced with this kind of crime, and you have prosecutors that are experienced prosecuting it.
It's a high-level court. I mean, it's known nationwide as a high-level court.
Well, the Southern District of New York, I was in the Middle District of Florida. The Southern District of New York always thinks they're better than everybody. And if you go to these meetings with all the criminal chiefs from all the Southern District of New York, the criminal chief there always thought he was better than all of us. I mean, they just think that.
So you're saying they agree. They think it's a very
they agree. They
court.
think they're number one, right?
Okay, number two. If you read through this and you read through the fraud and the schemes and the false pretenses and false representations and wire fraud and using radio, television, or wire to commence that fraud, you don't hear anything about cryptocurrency. I mean, you hear a little bit of it here when he talks about a crypto hedge fund. But listen, like you said, wire fraud is wire fraud is wire fraud, whether it's cryptocurrency or not.
Right.
So I'm going to hit one of these questions. What if you were prosecuting this case and you don't know anything about cryptocurrency, would you be able to still handle a case like this?
Oh, sure. Because first off, you're going to have experts come in, and I guarantee you there's an FBI agent that's an expert on cryptocurrency.
Probably a department.
Right. Or there's somebody at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Because as a prosecutor, you can reach out to any federal agency, pull the guy in and say, here, take the stand, tell us about cryptocurrency. He'll explain cryptocurrency. But as a prosecutor, what you're really going to do is you're going to make this case simple. You're going to say, all right, this is cryptocurrency, but it's just like potatoes. You know, you steal potatoes, you've committed a crime. So this is a fraud, is a theft, is a lie, is a dishonest act. Simple.
And there are other cases that are on other topics that lawyers or jurors are not experts on that we still try cases on all the time, whether it's a Medicare case where you have to get into this CPT coding and what's appropriate on Medicare and what's not, that nobody knows off the top of their head, but you explain it to the jury in a way they can understand and everybody understands. You don't want to lie and misrepresent to take people's money and then use it on whatever you want to use it on, which you didn't even really get into the houses and the parties and the things that he, is accused of doing with that money, on top of investing it and commingling it and misappropriating it. But whether it's crypto or anything else, federal prosecutors know how to prosecute federal crimes like this, regardless of what the topic area is. All right. Count 2, wire fraud on customers, 2019 to 2022. Same thing, defrauded, obtained money and property by means of false and fraudulent pretenses. And he used it to pay expenses and debts of Alameda Research, his proprietary crypto hedge fund. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Now we're talking about on the lenders. So what's the difference between what?
Go ahead.
What's the
You're
difference
going to
between
ask me.
lenders and customers?
These are the banks. These are the people that loaned money to Alameda for, let's say, buying a penthouse in the Bahamas or buying some land or buying a building. These banks were given financial statements of Alameda. The financial statements did not reflect or properly reflect the debt to FTX, because both within FTX's books and Alameda's books, they had a fuzzy accounting with regards to these loans and whether these loans are actually properly reflected. So, like I said, in FTX, you have a negative balance in an account. Well, think about it. You can't have a negative dollars in an account. So it wasn't properly reflected. And the bank certainly doesn't know about it. So when they did their financial statements to the bank loaned them money based on a fraudulent financial application. And that's what this is. I think there's 2 counts of that.
Right. And it talks about they agreed to defraud lenders is the big difference here. Alameda Research and the Bankman-Fried's proprietary crypto hedge, another wire fraud on lenders here. And then we have conspiracy to commit commodities fraud. Again, for 3 years, Southern District of New York, the defendant willfully and knowingly did combine, conspire, confederate, and agree together with each other to commit an offense against the United States. Okay, this one is against the United States, to wit, commodities fraud in violation of Title VII USC. It was part and an object of the conspiracy that SBF and others, known and unknown, willfully and knowingly, would and did directly and indirectly use and employ. I mean, these legalese are so great. And attempt to use and employ in connection with a swap, a contract for sale of a commodity in interstate commerce, and for future delivery on and subject to the rules of a registered entity, a manipulative and deceptive device and contravance.
Contravence. Again, in other words, against something.
Contravance. It's not viance.
Right.
I don't know.
Contra means against, right?
Right. And in contravention of Title 17, blah, 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 by using and employing and attempting to use and employ a manipulative device, scheme, and artifice to defraud, making and attempting to make an untrue and misleading statement of material fact and omitting to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statements made not untrue and misleading. This is as confusing as you can possibly write it. And engaging and attempting to engage in an act, practice, and course of business which is operated and would operate as a fraud and deceit upon a person. He agreed with others to defraud customers of FTX, trading or intending to trade swaps by misappropriating those customers' deposits and using those deposits to pay expensive debts of Alameda, his crypto hedge fund. So what does that mean? He's just misappropriating funds, basically.
Well, it is, but see, with the commodities, it's a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're saying is that cryptocurrency is a commodity. It's a potato. It's a gallon of oil. It's a commodity, and there are certain rules that the Commodities Futures Trade Commission has. And if you don't do it, well, frankly, any kind of a fraud is a violation of that act. So if you do a commodity in such a way as to be defrauding somebody, then you violate the act.
Right. And again, he was taking the money and using it for other stuff, basically.
Right.
Okay. Count 6 is conspiracy to commit securities fraud. All right. The defendant, what did he do here? How's the explanation? It was part and object, the conspiracy, willingly and knowingly, directly and indirectly, by use of a means and instrumentality of interstate commerce and of the mails and of a facility of a national securities exchange, use and employ in connection with the purchase and sale of a security registered on a national securities exchange and any security not so registered, a manipulative and deceptive device. And okay, so again, it's all the same stuff, basically employing a scheme, making untrue statements.
The difference here is with the security, these are the people that invested in the company.
Right.
Before commodities, those are people that bought and sold the product. These are people that invest in the company, because you invest in a company, basically you buy stock, which is a security. So this count goes to those people that invested in the company.
and there's a securities filing, right? That you said the SEC.
There's a civil securities action that's been filed. Yes.
Right. And we'll talk about that. And that'll be something that you guys will have to let us know in the comments if you want us to dig deeper in, because we're not going to have enough time to go fully into that today as well. Conspiracy to commit money laundering. So what's the difference in the money laundering count?
Money laundering is basically anytime you use funds that came from an illegal source, which is a criminal source, which is, in this case, a fraud. If you put that money in a bank, which is a federally chartered and protected institution, it becomes money laundering because you're putting illegal funds into a federal institution and you're trying to basically launder those funds. So anytime you do that, it becomes a crime and it's money laundering. Money laundering is a catch-all that they use all the time because it's easy to prove and it has a pretty severe sentence.
Especially when it's in connection with fraud like this. Would and did
500 million. I mean, how many millions of dollars did they deposit in the banks?
Would and did knowingly engage in attempt to engage in a monetary transaction and criminally derived property of a value greater than $10,000, and that was derived from specified unlawful activity. That's from the fraud, like you said, the wire fraud allegation in count 2 of this indictment. So literally, they're referencing the wire fraud is how at least they got some of this money in to launder it and basically take illegitimate or contraband criminal money and make it legal money, right? It goes into the bank and then it comes out and now it's good and you can go use it. And, we don't want that in the United States.
It looks cleaner, right?
Exactly. All right. Count 8, conspiracy to defraud the United States and violate the campaign finance laws. So we're going to read through this one because this one's pretty interesting to me. And a lot of some people have made this all about politics, as some people like to do. Other people have not even mentioned it, so you wouldn't even know that politics is a part of this. But to me, the fact that they're going to charge something like this means politics is going to get swept in, whether people want it to or not.
Peter, when you asked me about the background, the one thing I didn't say was that he contributed $40 million to Democratic candidates. And that's something that I neglected to talk about when we first had a background on it.
And I mean, obviously, because this is a big fraud case, and as we just saw, the money laundering was attached to the fraud and the commingling and the misappropriation of funds, I'm assuming they're going to be able to connect at least some of that $40 million to the money he was stealing from people investing, from customers, from banks, etc.
They are, but that's not the crime. The crime in this case.
Hold on, let's read it.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's read it. Then you can explain.
Frankly, I got to be honest with you. You'll read this, you won't know what the crime is.
All right, go ahead. You can tell us what it is then. Go ahead.
No, I'm just telling you. Basically, it says that he violated the law. But what really happened was he exceeded the maximum that you can contribute to a candidate by giving this money to other people to make the contributions for him, so that he got around the maximum limits by using straw men to make these contributions.
Right, which is what it says here.
Right.
Through deceitful and dishonest means, the Federal Election Commission functioned to administer federal law concerning the source and amount restrictions in federal elections, including the prohibitions applicable to corporate contributions and conduit contributions in violation of Title 18. So that's basically he fraudulently went around and made sure you give people more money than they were supposed to be given.
He used a conduit. Right.
Which to me, I mean, everybody could do that. I'm sure there are companies that do it, but the reason for that is so it's not just the richest person in the world picking who the president is or picking who the senator is in their state. Although it does feel like that sometimes.
Believe it or not, this guy is the second largest campaign contributor in the country. Wow. George Soros is the only one that contributes more money than he did.
Well, I think that's going to change next year. We'll see. Yeah. Okay. Forfeiture allegations. Okay. As a result of committing these offenses, he shall forfeit to the United States any and all property, real and personal, that constitutes or is derived from proceeds traceable to the commission of said offenses, including but not limited to a sum of money in the United States currency representing the amount of proceeds traceable to the commission of said offenses. Couple questions here. Number one, does he have any money that are not traceable to these this fraudulent activity in FTX? And number two, how do they deal with cryptocurrency here, where it can be hidden or it can be in, safes people don't know how to get to, or you have to have a password to get?
Well, the court can order him to provide the passwords to access his, they call them wallets, to access his wallet where he has his cryptocurrency. So you've got that. You've got, again, the difficulty in cryptocurrency, no one is denying it. It is something that's hard to track. But the interesting thing too about any kind of forfeiture is they may order him to forfeit something. He may have given that, in one of the things that kind of a side issue are, let's say his parents. He has two parents that are law professors at Stanford. They did not actively maybe participate in the company, but they benefited financially from what I've read. They can try to get that money from them that they received from this through him, saying that that transfer was not a legitimate transfer to them because it was based on fraudulent activity. It's like if someone comes in and robs a bank and takes that money and gives you the money from stealing from the bank, the government can come and take that money back from you because that money was not lawfully his to give. So you've got other people, and there's a lot going on here, because earlier you read about what a conspiracy is. Conspiracy is people getting together to agree to commit a crime. If you notice, he's the only name in this indictment. So there are other people out there that got together with him to commit the crime. Where are those other people? What is their status, and why aren't they named here?
Yeah. Hold on. There's some good questions coming in, but they talk about here that they can't get it through due diligence. And again, that's where they can just order somebody to give them the money. So somebody just commented, Selena, I watched most of the live FTX CEO hearing before Congress today. So talk about the timing of this arrest. He was scheduled to be before Congress today and speaking, and they decided to arrest him prior to that. What's up with the timing? Why didn't they wait?
Well, let me tell you the theories, because no one can really know, because you weren't in the room when they made the decision to do this and do the indictment and the timing of the arrest in the Bahamas. But the theory is, number one, he has already spoken a lot. He had New York Times interviews. He was on the internet. He has given tons of interviews where he told all sorts of ridiculous and inconsistent statements. And what the government was worried about, from what I can gather, is when he talked at this congressional hearing, they were worried that the country was going to say to themselves, why is this guy a free man? Why is he sitting here in front of Congress? Why haven't they arrested him? Why haven't they indicted him? Why haven't they done what law enforcement should do? And it would give a kind of a bad image to law enforcement to have this guy sitting there casually answering questions from Congress. Now, the other side is the government, the prosecutors, could have fed questions of the congressman to have them ask specific questions during the interview so they could also have that information. But I think they worried about the black eye more than getting more information, and that's why they did it, so that it wouldn't look bad and they wouldn't appear to be soft on crime.
Okay, a couple questions in here, but I want to first point out some of these comments. I heard that both parties got money because he was trying to get SEC regulations changed. Rachel said, just to note, he contributes to both sides. Elska Cave said $70 million to Democrats, $200,000 to Republicans. A quote, I donated to both parties. I donated about the same amount to both parties, SBF said in an interview. And then June said, regardless of side here, can they take back donations from the candidates?
They really might be able to. I don't think
it's just
they
not
will.
feasible.
It's just not going to happen. But I've got to tell you that I wouldn't rely on a lot he says, because I have read where he actually admits that he says things just for public comment and to look good. Like, he doesn't believe in regulation of cryptocurrency, but he says that. But in an interview, when he was asked, he said, oh, sure, I want to have regulation. This guy will say anything, anytime that benefits him at the time. So I wouldn't believe a lot of what he's saying.
Yeah, Ray said the same thing. I'm so annoyed at him playing the innocent kid. He's 30 years old and did this deliberately, did this all on purpose. That does seem to be a sentiment. And Rosie asked, would love to know what lawyers think about SBF divulging so much information on Twitter.
Well, I sure wouldn't have him do it. I'd shut him up in a heartbeat. That's a big mistake, and it's going to bite him at a trial, because this case is probably going to trial. and it really is going to bite him.
Well, he says stuff like, "Oh, we were doing millions of transactions a day. We had this much in the account. There was no oversight. We had too much risk." He's saying all this stuff that, even if he did have some kind of clue what was going on, some of that's going to be wrong. It's like way too much, way too vague for the details that are in a multi-billion-dollar company like this.
And he does admit that he lies. I mean, he said, "Yeah, I said that, but I didn't really mean it because I just said it because it sounded good."
And Seth here, is this lawful law? That's been running through my head the whole time. All this just seems so crazy. Whenever I read his tweets and things like that, yeah, he played like he wasn't into the money, but you see like his house in the Bahamas, and you see some of the stuff that he did with the money. He may not have liked it, but he sure seemed to enjoy it. Kimberly Mack is a new member as well. Make sure you check out the member community page for some posts on there coming up this week. Let's see. Is this like the Fire Fest? It seems it's like a little bit more like Bernie Madoff, right? I mean, how different is this than Bernie Madoff?
Well, it certainly is different in scope. It's much bigger than Bernie
crazy
Madoff was.
Yeah.
And it was not. Bernie was a really pure Ponzi scheme. This guy was a Ponzi scheme because he was using. Ponzi schemes are when you use your new investors to pay your old investors. And therefore it keeps the money flowing. This guy was borrowing the money for his hedge fund to make all these investments, and he was securing it with cryptocurrency, which when it crashed, that's when everything crashed. Barney was a similar situation, just not as big in scope. And
well, I actually think
was,
I like the Fire Fest analogy because Rombo Hedril said Bernie survived 17 years. I think Bernie Madoff knew exactly what was going on in his business. He had a plan. He was smart. He did it a specific way to try to conceal it. This guy seemed more like Fire Fest, where it's like money was going out everywhere. Everybody was partying. Yeah. Life was large. Losing 10
he was not sophisticated. He was not sophisticated. Really, Bernie was a really sophisticated Wall Street guy. This guy was not. This guy was, think about it, he was 30 years old and having a good time.
Exactly. Which the Fire Fest was this fake festival that they set up and like never actually made any plans or built any infrastructure or did anything, but they got all this money and hyped it up with social media influencers, which brings us to a question we've asked so many times. How are we going to get caught in the web here if you were a social media influencer or Tom Brady or Bunchin or Steph Curry or somebody that promoted this and was paid to do this? Are they going to get in trouble criminally or civilly?
Well, there are 2 class action suits already filed, one in Florida and one in California. I do not know who all the defendants are, but I would certainly think that those lawyers are going to include the personalities and say that those celebrities influenced us to invest in that and to try to get those influencers. I know that the parents, from what I've heard, the parents have already been sued or are going to be sued. His parents are going to spend a lot of money they probably don't have now to defend themselves in these suits. So I think those people are going to go after anybody they can to get their money back.
So criminally speaking, we're not expecting any charges to come because most of the time these influencers have no clue what it is that they're selling. They're not giving financial advice or legal advice or things like that. We're not giving legal advice on YouTube either, or financial advice on YouTube. But when we talk through this stuff and, Tom Brady gets up there and is like, I got my FTX stuff, who's with me, or something like that to make people want to go get it, or like we said, influence them to get it. It's literally in the name, which I'm interested to see if that pops up in the future. Like, you are literally called an influencer, whether it's social media, sports, celebrity, whatever, but you think there could be civil liability on some of these influencers.
I do, because let's say they said something like, FTX is a great company. It's safe, it's solid, and you can believe in it. Statements like that maybe they didn't know any different, but the fact that they would make that statement without doing some due diligence backing it up, that may show some negligence enough for a civil case.
But here's my issue with that. If we look back to Theranos and you talk about due diligence before promoting something like that, you have some of the smartest, richest, most powerful,
Yep.
military leaders, politicians, celebrities, rocket scientists that are all invested. If they're all into it, if I'm Tom Brady, how much research do I really have to do before this person gives me $1 million to make an Instagram post being like,
it's what a jury is going to say he has to do.
yeah, I think it's really interesting
Yeah.
what kind of
Yeah.
backlash influencers get. I personally think they should be limited to the amount of money they were paid to promote it. I don't know if that's actually possible because damages are usually attributable to the loss of the victim.
Right.
So if I lost $1 billion and I sue Tom Brady and he only made $1 million, well, he's not limited to that $1 million he made. If I say he cost me $1 billion, that's what I'm going to ask the jury for. All right. So the last thing I want to touch on just for a few minutes is the SEC filing. So explain what that is, how that's different from criminal charges, and give us a little bit about what you read in there.
Well, the SEC gave me a lot more information than the indictment did about what they did. That explanation that I gave you really came more out of the SEC because the indictment was pretty bare bones. They just repeat the statute, all that fancy language, and they don't give you a whole lot of facts. The SEC is asking for money. They want to recoup the people's losses. They are asking for an injunction, which means that they want to enjoin or say you cannot deal anymore in securities or finances, or there's a whole list of financial transactions they can't deal in anymore. And the SEC really is charging them with what we call 10b-5 allegations, which are the statute that is a fraudulent activity under the Securities and Exchange Act. So they can't do any kind of stock transfers, can't be a broker, can't sit on the New York Stock Exchange, can't do any of those things that the average person can because of the fraudulent activity that they conducted. But it's an interesting
So why
charge, yeah.
With criminal restitution, why is that necessary?
Because the SEC actually has some powers that they can go beyond what the criminal statute could go into as far as restitution. The criminal statute is limited to the what is charged in the indictment. In other words, if they say lender was defrauded, well, by how much was the lender defrauded? But there could be 10,000 customers out there. This doesn't really bring into play maybe 10,000, all 10,000 customers. But the Securities and Exchange Commission could try to reimburse all 10,000 customers. So there are some differences in the restitution aspect. So you really can get more money from the SEC. But then again, is there any money to get? Of course, that's the question that's going to be answered here in the future.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So I think as we look at what he's charged with and the facts we know at this point, what do you think the chances are of conviction in this case? Do you think, or I should say, before we get to that, what are his defenses going to be? What do you think he's going to argue? How's he going to try to get out of this? Because he will.
I think the first thing he's going to argue is that he had people under him running the operation, that he did not know what was going on, and that he trusted them, and he was naive in this. I mean, who in the world has experience running a $40 billion company at 30 years old? So he hired people, and those people are named. It's funny, they're named in the SEC complaint, but they're not actually being sued by the SEC. So, of course, this tells us that these people have run to the prosecutors and are cooperating at this point, so that they don't get banged. They will get banged somehow, but they'll get banged a lot less than he will. And they're all pointing the finger at him. So you're going to have everybody standing up there saying he's the guy. And so he's going to say, oh, no, it wasn't me. It was these people. I trusted them, and they just screwed this company up. In fact, he's made a lot of quotes about, I've made mistakes, but I never intentionally defrauded anybody. I never intentionally took any money. It's going to be a hard one, though, because we're looking at such huge numbers going from FTX to Alameda that it's impossible to think that he would not know this money is going there. And these investments were investments that benefited him, and Alameda is a company he controlled. It's going to be a tough sell to say he didn't know any of this fraudulent activity was going on. It's just too huge.
P-Hop said, thanks for covering this. I'm sure, or it sure is confusing, but Papa Tragos explains it well. It really is confusing, which is why, when my dad comes in here and explains that wire fraud is wire fraud is wire fraud, that's how you have to explain it to a jury, because the jury's not going to understand a lot of the intricacies, even though I know some people in this chat are saying crypto is so simple, it's easy to track. Here, this is what crypto is or means or whatever, but there's going to be people on the jury that don't understand that. So you have to be able to break it down in a way that they do and can understand it. So what do you think is a reasonable chances of conviction here?
Well, from the best I can figure, and this is kind of a quick calculation, he's looking at a maximum of 115 years in prison. His sentencing guidelines, and I know in other cases we've talked about sentencing guidelines, that these are standardized guidelines that judges use, and they fit different categories, like were you a leader or organizer? How much did you sell? Those kind was a lending institution affected by this. All of these go into that. He scores at the very top of the guidelines,
right? Because the money,
which is a 43. So he scores life, but he can't get life because none of these offenses are life offenses. Hey, the guy could get 115 years. I don't know. He could die in prison like Bernie Madoff did, but he's a lot younger going into prison than Bernie was.
But you're pretty confident he's going to get convicted?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's funny, like when we read the indictment and the value for one of them was something over $10,000. It almost makes you laugh. To get the threshold to get into this, to violate this statute is you have to be over $10,000, and he's looking at $40 billion or whatever.
I guarantee you that was lower than the threshold to invest in his company.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what's crazy to think about here. And I do think that the celebrity part of this, I put this on the screen from Cryptophasia. Judge Michael Fitzgerald also said that investors should be expected to act reasonably before basing their bets on the zeitgeist of the moment. And Southern Mama said, what makes me mad is all the celebrities made my teenage son want to invest. I wouldn't let him. We are coming to a world and a place and time where people are going to pay other people to say anything about any product, whether they've ever used it or know anything about it. I mean, even people somebody sent me some kind of pills that they wanted me to promote and sell on my YouTube channel. I'm like, I'm not taking these pills. I don't know what's in these pills. I'm not going to take these things. But I mean, people will just get on and say whatever it is that, they use. I can see it from both ends, right? I would never do that. I would never promote some product and act like, I know it's so great if it's not. But on the other end, if I do promote some product, it doesn't necessarily mean I know it's going to work forever or be perfect, or you're going to make a lot of money on this cryptocurrency or whatever. So to me, yeah. And he said, if celebs promote it, ignore it. I mean, the point is that's the world we live in. This is, TV commercials have been around forever. This is the new age of TV commercials, because people have more of a connection with a social media influencer on Instagram or YouTube or, TikTok or, the NFL than they do just watching some TV station where commercials are playing. So it is going to be something that I think we need to figure out kind of how we're going to do. And you think about these companies, they pay for their own commercials, but you would never see Fox get indicted for some cigarette commercial that they put on, because the cigarette companies are the ones all getting sued for the class action lawsuits. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about where an influencer sits in this chain of events that sells these fraudulent products to the customers.
Well, that's why, and I know this is another subject, but that's why there's a specific federal statute protecting Facebook and protecting those large media companies from being sued for the content that other people post. And that's one of the complaints is, should they be responsible? Because right now they're not. You can post anything and Facebook is not responsible for what you post. But there's some argument that statute should change.
Right. And they've been saying it. Natalie O said, what about Super Bowl commercials for FTX? Is the station liable? No, they're not going to be. There are different, but you think about it, especially in the political nature and that we're in right now, certain stations will absolutely not play certain politically charged commercials, and other ones will absolutely play just that one and not a different one. So it's like they do undertake some sort of agreement with the commercials that they play, but it's different in that kind of advertising, which is what makes it so interesting to me. The whole influencer part of this. And Midnight Queen said, if I were to promote a product, it would have to be something I personally use and believe in. Well, Midnight Queen, let me turn this question around on you. What if this was me or Tom Brady or whatever, and I actually believed it and invested $10 million of my own money with FTX? Does that make me less liable because I believed it and I used it and thought it was a great product too and led people off of a cliff? Because that's the problem. We don't really know all of the relationships and what they do know about it. And where do we draw the line as far as due diligence goes? So it's a really interesting conversation to me that I'm interested in getting into. In this case, I think will help it. Lopez Mateo Sport Fishing. That's a cool logo you got there. Welcome to the club. So yeah, I mean, to me, this is really interesting. And that's an aspect of this case that I'm really interested in. Anything else, closing thoughts you have for this one?
No, except everybody should realize this is not going to be a short process, that his extradition has to go through the Bahamian courts. He's not going to get a lot of it. I mean, we're not going to get a lot of problem from the Bahamian courts, but it takes time. We have to show them we have credible evidence. The Bahamian court has to order it. So he could fight, Assange, I think I'm pronouncing it right, who was being extradited from the United Kingdom. He fought extradition for 5 years in the United Kingdom. So we've got that situation. Then after that, then we have to come here. Think how complicated this case is going to be for all the investigation. Think how many documents the government has assembled in this case that some defense lawyer is going to have to go through. You're looking easily at 2 or 3 years before this case comes to trial.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to be a long process, but let us know in the comments, in the chat, by liking the video, if it's something you want us to continue to follow. If it's not, we'll go to some other case. Not a big deal. But if it is, please let us know because it's new for us. And we will continue to dive into it. And Rambo Hedril said 2023 is full of interesting trials. Daybells, Murdaugh. There's so much more than that. And if you want to hear me talk about the biggest or most significant trials of 2022, I'm going on WFLA 8 with JB tomorrow at noon. And I am going to give a little sneak peek or look into 2023 and some of the biggest cases that are coming up that we can expect that we're going to follow in 2023. So check that out tomorrow at noon. That's all we've got for today's episode, Dad. Thanks for joining me, and we'll continue bringing you in on this one.
Okay, good to see you.
All right, we'll see you guys later.